What's up, guys? It's time for my very first channel member review. We're gonna do The Mask of Zorro from 1998 with Antonio Banderas. Let's go. The Mask of Zorro stars Antonio Banderas, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Anthony Hopkins, and is directed by Martin Campbell. What's up, guys? We're gonna do a catalog title, non-horror. We're gonna do The Mask of Zorro. Yes, I always tell people I'm 85% horror, but I love movies in general. And this was an era in cinema in like the late 90s where you had a lot of those really fun action movies, but there was more than just like a realistic type action. It could be like a period piece, like you had like National Treasure. Then you had a little bit of horror in there with action, like The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. And there were just so many of these movies coming out, and a lot of them were really great. And Mask of Zorro was one of the better ones, I thought. I don't even remember the sequel to this one, The Legend of Zorro. I don't think I ever watched it, but The Mask of Zorro is hella fun, and I'm glad my channel member, Roderick Hare, asked me to review this one. If you're of a certain tier for channel member or patron, then you get a review in your honor. Like, I got a couple of patrons right now. I do a review every single month for them. And I thank them, and I thank all you guys that support me. But I thank you guys for throwing a lot of these movies that I probably would never even think to review, just because there's so many coming in front of us. You know, I do new releases. So it's fun to go back, though, and do a non-horror review like this for Mask of Zorro. So anyway, let's get right into it. Let's give you a quick plot synopsis. I remember watching a little bit of the old Zorro show way back in the, is it the 70s, maybe the 80s, something like that. But I always knew that eventually they would come back and do a modernized Zorro movie. And who better to do it than Antonio Banderas? Huge fan of his work in like Desperado and the sequel to that one, Once Upon a Time in Mexico. But man, that character is one of the best, most fleshed out, badass characters that he played in Desperado. And I've watched Desperado so many times. Love that movie. It just oozes action, oozes sexuality, oozes everything. You know, I think it captured what a lot of action movies don't really capture. And most of them aren't even trying to capture it to the level that that movie does, but just has that Latin flavor to it. So Zorro, I think, is a little bit more sanitized version of Desperado, but he's not even the original Zorro. It's Anthony Hopkins' character. This movie takes place in the 1800s, I think late 1800s. He plays De La Vega. He's the original Zorro. Of course, nobody knows that he's Zorro. And he has this wife, and they just had a baby. In Montero, he's kind of the leader of the town, but he's just an asshole, and he's power hungry. And Zorro's getting in the way of that. And so this movie opens with a horrible tragedy happening where he's trying to kill Zorro, but he ends up killing his wife. To make matters even worse, he takes the child from him. And so later, we fast forward, say like 20 years, and it's Antonio Banderas plays Alejandro, him and his brother. They're criminals and they're wanted, but long story short, Alejandro ends up becoming Zorro, and a big part of that is he's got a temper on him. His brother died, was killed. And so there's a revenge aspect to this. And this is one of those movies where you have the teacher training the student because he ends up meeting De La Vega, and De La Vega trains him. And the training sequences in this movie are some of the most fun because, you know, De La Vega, he is just more seasoned, he's calm, and he's trying to teach Alejandro that he's just a hothead. And he thinks he knows everything, and he's cocky. And there's just some really funny scenes that play out during that. And I like how this movie, structure-wise, it takes some time. Like the first time he's Zorro, he's very, very rough around the edges. There's definitely some comedy that plays out in those scenes. You know, there's a big dust-up scene where he's barely getting by fighting everybody. And we always seem to have these funny action sequences in those movies, like in the late 90s, like in The Mummy. But then the next time he becomes Zorro, he's much more like debonair and suave, and you know, he just kicks ass. But there's a lot of heart and emotion that I loved in Mask of Zorro as well, with De La Vega. I mean, just imagine you're a father and you got to watch your daughter grow up. You can't tell her that you're her father. And you see her under the rule of this asshole that killed your wife. And this movie plays around with that notion and explores the drama that could come of it. And there's this really heartfelt scene where De La Vega is talking to Catherine Zeta-Jones. You can tell that he just wants to hug her. He wants to reach out. And he sort of tells her that he lost a daughter, but obviously he can't tell her that that she's the daughter. So this movie has some great emotion, but then it also has some really fun comedic moments where you have this fight, sort of a fight, like a sexy fight between Catherine Zeta-Jones and Antonio Banderas. And he's just playing around and having a blast with it. But she has some skill with the blade. But eventually he ends up like having fun and cutting her clothes off. But they don't show as it's happening. They just show his facial expression as it's happening. And it's hilarious. Antonio Banderas is so freaking good in this movie. And he's supported by phenomenal actors behind him, especially like Anthony Hopkins, who's a chameleon, who can just play any part. I mean, he played Hannibal Lecter. And then he comes and plays this like sophisticated, cunning fighter, swordsman, and he sells it. He really sells it. Now, the movie's about 2.5 hours long, but it feels like it just breezes right by. I didn't remember much of this movie because I hadn't seen it in like 20 years. But boy, did I just have a blast watching this. It has a big action spectacle in the last act. And it's a popcorn movie. At the end of the day, that's what this is. Just a fun, action-packed popcorn movie. And I'm glad that Roderick asked me to review it. And I'm definitely probably going to watch it again down the road. It's a good Saturday afternoon movie, okay? So I'm going to give this a purchase worthy for sure. Let me know your thoughts on The Mask of Zorro in the comments. Looking forward to reading them. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day. On Fridays, we do FIFA Fridays. Follow my Drumdums on my socials. Support me on Patreon. Become a channel member. Buy me a coffee. Plenty of ways to support me. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a good day. Drumdum out.